finishing strong, looking out for hurting children all around, and helping good parents carry on. Standing united, we'll overcome. We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness.
Good evening, everyone. Happy Sunday. It's so good to have you in company. Welcome to another Family Fest conversation about children and recovery from parental alienation, hope for children in recovering from parental alienation and reconnecting with alienated parents. My name is Dale Ford, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour. And I'd like to introduce my guests now. I say good afternoon to Reverend Dr. Gordon Edward, Carrie Jordan, and Cornelius Bartlett. If you're joining us for the first time, or if you haven't been following our conversations, in our previous discussions, we took an in-depth look at the effects of narcissism and parental alienation on the life of a child. While parental alienation is a vicious and painful family dynamic, is there any hope for the recovery of the alienated child? This discussion will seek to unpack as many elements as possible of what hope and healing could look like for children who are the real victims of parental alienation. So our objective to offer prescriptions of hope for saving the children who are innocent victims of this abusive phenomenon called parental alienation. So I'll start with Reverend Dr. Gordon Edward. Good afternoon, Dr. Gordon. Reverend Gordon?
Yes, I'm here, but I cannot get the video.
That's fine. We can see your photo and we can hear you. Okay. So until you get that sorted out, we are very happy to have you in the conversation. Just tell us, there you are. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Gordon, for those who may be joining us for the first time and are not familiar with you and your work.
Okay, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. I am a pastor, have been a pastor for the better part of 38 years. So I started very young. I usually say to persons, don't take my gray beard to mean that I have a lot of years. But I studied in the Caribbean, worked in the Caribbean, studied for ministry in the Caribbean, went to UWI, went to UTCWI, and that's where my teeth got cut, and my heart, as it is oriented towards psychotherapy, got going. I'm still a pastor, and I am a psychotherapist, licensed in marriage and family therapy, psychoanalysis, as well as also having completed a doctorate in clinical psychology. I'm married and I have 2 children, 2 adult children, married for the last almost 32 years. So yeah, I'm in the Bronx, New York, managing a mid-sized psychotherapy practice in which other therapists also practice with me and I supervise them. I'm from Antigua in the Caribbean.
Thanks so much, Reverend Dr. Gordon Edward, who's one of the panelists. And we say good afternoon to Carrie Jordan. Carrie was part of our conversation before, but if you're meeting him for the first time, Carrie, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carrie Jordan, as you said. I am my current position. I work with at-risk youth. I'm not going to say exactly where. However, I work with at-risk youth, and I am also into law enforcement. I got my first degree from Alabama A&M University in criminology, and my master's is in social work, family, and child welfare. For quite some time, I've been working with young people. I am a strong advocate of young people, but I do a lot of it behind the scenes. I'm not one of those that is out there do behind the scene work. And that's basically it for me right now. I'm nowhere near the amount of years in marriage or anything like that as Reverend Gordon. I'm more closer to his years in marriage as it relates to my age, but I'm 42. So I can't compete with him in the marriage arena or anything like that. So that's just basically me right now.
Thanks so much, Carrie. And of course, Cornelius, good afternoon. You're the founder of Family Fest. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and of course, why you decided that this would be this year's theme.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Good afternoon, everyone. Dale said I'm the chairman and founder of Family Fest Barbados, and I guess God would have chosen me because I have a passion for families. Outside of that, I actually make a hobby of human behavior. So in studying human behavior and realizing that a lot of persons out there are suffering from the issue of what people are now realizing is parental alienation. In studying that topic, it led me right back to narcissism. So I felt that this year we cannot discuss human behavior, parental alienation without discussing the issue of narcissism. So I am also, apart from that, I am a business manager in the day. I run my own company, Corbar Business Solutions, and I have not only a child and children that are teenagers, but I also have a grown adult child who has produced two wonderful grandsons. So my first grandson happens to be around the age of 12. So I don't know what that says about me in terms of age, but I feel as young as I did when I was at school. But this year, I'm very excited about this topic, and I've been getting a lot of calls. So I know that we are on the right track with bringing this to the fore. So that's it about me.
All right, so we're going to jump off from there because we had some conversations last week and earlier this week, and we talked about narcissism, and we looked at some of the signs and some of the symptoms, and today we're focusing on recovery. So I'm going to go straight to Reverend Dr. Gordon Edward. Dr. Edwards, tell us how, after all that damage has been done, because we've covered that before, we know the challenges it presents for young children, the kind of disconnect, the kind of interaction challenges that they're having. When those diagnoses have been made and a referral has been made for the child to get help, what are the next steps? What happens after that?
Thank you for the question. One of the things that becomes so critical is not just that the child get the kind of help, meaning going into therapy in some settings, but the parents also have to be willing not to get in the way of the child's treatment. Sometimes the alienating parent might sabotage what the child is experiencing in therapy, sometimes prying into what is said and what is done and the process so that they can otherwise make adjustments. The other thing, though, is that I believe there should also be a networking that takes place so that the child can have support wider than the immediate family unit that the child is involved with. And part of this could be group experience with other children who have suffered from parental alienation. The other thing too is that the parents have to be very open to this. Both the alienating parent, who might be manifesting severe symptoms of narcissistic features, but the alienated parent should also be willing and open to come alongside this child.
What happens when one of the parents decides, or even both of the parents decide, they don't want the child to have this kind of help? I mentioned this before. Some parents say, don't want you going and talking to all the family business with a stranger. Those kinds of attitudes towards therapy. What kind of effect can that have on the child?
Well, it can have seriously adverse effect upon the child, and that is also one of the reasons that conversations need to be had with the parents, both parents, as per the interest of the child, the health of the child, and also look at how the child is suffering from this alienation. Because too often we might just focus upon the child and the parents are the ones who are in the way. So we might need to meet with those parents, explain to them what is going on and the long-term implications of parental alienation. So that's another piece, as well as accessing other key people in the life of the parent. Maybe their pastor, and have the pastor also help to convince the parent that this is a good thing. And it's not about washing their dirty laundry in public, but rather coming alongside the child who is in need of help.
How early can children start? From what age? What's the earliest age a child can start therapy?
Well, it depends. You have persons, some therapists who have specialized in working with children, 2, 3, 4 years doing play therapy. The days where also you might notice some early tendencies. So as they go, but the hope is that before teen years, that work can be done, because after that, as the years progress, it becomes more steeped, more difficult to begin to unpack. Not impossible, but more difficult to do, especially because at that time as well, the child is going through their own personal developmental challenges.
Carrie, what age do the children you've interacted with? What are the ages? Because you said you're an advocate for young people. So does your assistance or your expertise or your observations come only with teenagers, or have you been able to work with younger children as well?
Most of my experience or interventions come with mostly teenagers within the context of the law. The law in Barbados 11. It usually start about 11 years old and usually all the way up to about 18, 17, 18. That's the population that I usually engage with on a day-to-day basis.
No, when you come in contact with these children who have had these kinds of situations where they have a parent who has been responsible for alienating them from another parent, what are some of the common things, some of the common challenges that these children face, and how does that make your work even more challenging to help them?
Well, first of all, in respect of narcissism and the alienation and all that, most of the population I deal with, there's the absence of parents, or not necessarily absence of parents, but absence of parenting that result in the at-risk behaviors that they start to engage in. But when you look at parental alienation, not necessarily that population, but sometimes you see one or two where both parents are still in each child's life, but you can see the distance between parents. The children at that stage in their development tend to use it to their advantage. When there's alienation, they learn very fast how to play both sides of the table to their benefit, and not necessarily that the alienation is that I can disrespect. I mean, they literally get into the ability, they develop the ability to, or when mommy is here today, I can talk bad about daddy. When daddy is here next week, I can talk bad about mommy, because both of them know that they both think that I hate each other. When that may not be the case, they still do love the parents, but they use it to their benefit, especially teenage stage, to get away with a lot of the behaviors that teenagers would try in a regular home setting. But when you're dealing with at risk now, it's even worse, because I don't want to spend the week with mommy because daddy is allowing me to do as I like. So I can make sure that mommy get upset with me enough that I could go cross with daddy and I could leave the house and go by boyfriend or girlfriend. And you know, the different things that teenagers try, the at-risk behaviors, or mommy don't mind the kind of friends they got around me. So I rather stay by mommy on weekends because then I can get to go outside and I'm out till late hours of the night and all these different things. So the population itself that I deal with, they tend to have a wit about them to use the alienation, if it does happen, to their benefit and not so that it is affecting them, because a lot of children that get into the at-risk behaviors that I deal with, most of the time is that the parents are present but not present. And the children just raising themselves. So the population is that, as I said, the group that I deal with in terms of population, the alienation benefits them to some extent at that age range. Alienation tends more to be more effective with younger children. However, it sometimes too can confuse them. But when they get to the teenage stage, they develop the ability to choose sides on their own, and it's mostly to their benefit, I would say. I might be subject to correction on that, but that's my experience. Most of the time, the alienation practices are used to the benefit of the child.
All right, Karen, I'm going to come back to you about some of the programs to be able to reach these at-risk youth. And I also want to get an idea of what the at-risk behavior is, but I want to go to Cornelius because Cornelius, Kerry said something that's very interesting. He said the parents may be present, but they may not necessarily be imparting the kind of knowledge, the kind of discipline, the kind of rearing that children would need to be able to have in real life situations. So I want you to talk about that a little bit. Yes, a child may live with one parent or both parents. They come home, they do their homework, but the parents don't really have a connection with the children. So I want you to stress on the importance of not just being present, but being involved in your children's lives.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you asked that question, because to stay on the topic of parental alienation and what it is, being present is extremely important. In order for a child to grow up well adjusted and to have the right psychological construct to go on and become a productive citizen, somebody's good wife or husband, somebody's good mother or father, it is important those early years. So let's back up a little bit and look at what parental alienation is again, to make sure that we're not mixing up parental alienation with estrangement, where a parent wants nothing to do with a child, or we're not mixing up the regular teenage development. Because in teenage development, as Kerry quite rightly listed, some children trade off and play one parent against the other to do what they want. In parental alienation, as defined by the psychologist started back in '85 with Richard Gardner, it is where a child who would want to normally have, or who normally had a great relationship with a parent, now decides to reject the other parent because the parent with which they live, or the person or persons with which they live or reside, have brainwashed them into rejecting the other parent. So imagine you are in a position now where you want to have a great relationship with daddy or mommy before the marriage broke up or relationship broke up. But now you realize that mommy or daddy gets really upset if you say that you went away and had a good time with dad or mom. And then what you get then is a lot of pleasing of mommy or daddy. So the child learns to tell lies and say, but I didn't have a good time or whatever. So what I would want to say is that in itself has a very serious and devastating effect on the mind of the child. So with that devastating effect, you have a whole set of issues which people like Dr. Edwards and same Mr. Jordan is going to have to deal with. But it is important to recognize that one parent tells the other child or transfer let me put it in layman terms. It is one parent transferring the hatred they have for another parent with which they no longer have a relationship to the child. In other words, when a marriage ends, and let's be very, very clear. When a marriage ends, the parent dynamic doesn't have to end. Within a marriage where you have children, you have two dynamics in operation. You have the marriage dynamic or the common law dynamic, if it is a common law relationship. And you have the parental dynamic, which means mommy and daddy is mommy and daddy to this child or children. When the marriage ends, the parent dynamic doesn't end. So essentially what you have is one parent through brainwashing, bad talking, all the things that goes into parental alienation, and then that child develops a syndrome called parental alienation syndrome. And from that syndrome, you get the rejection, the denigration, the actually going around talking bad about a parent with which you previously had a great relationship. So if I want to talk about hope this evening, I would want the hope to look like hope for the child and hope also in terms of how the parent that is rejected should respond. Because invariably, you might have a child, for example, who decide to reject mommy or daddy. And then they leave the environment because one of the secrets to recovery from alienation has to do with the child being removed from the environment that is causing the alienation. And sometimes a child may become removed from an environment through going to study, going away on a holiday, like a summer holiday, where they get into a more positive environment. So there are many reasons why a child can recover. But the important thing, Dale, to note is that when a child recovers or starts to recover, it is important for that parent who was rejected to be in a position, listen carefully, to be in a position to receive that child again. I don't know if any of you all remember the story of the prodigal son, where the prodigal son rejected his father, asked for his inheritance, left. And I can imagine how humiliated the father was. Because parental alienation is humiliating. You had a child that you used to once go to the beach with, you'll be going to fairs and going to functions with, going to dinner with, and your child after divorce all of a sudden rejects you, saying that you're the worst person in the world. They don't want you at their football or their recital, their football match. They don't want you anywhere to do with them. When that child recovers, it's important that you don't hold the rejection in mind and that you can do like the father of the prodigal son and receive that child with open arms. So I want to say that when it comes to recovery, recovery is not only about the child themselves recovering, but it's about the parent that was rejected being in a position mentally to receive that child again.
So, Dr. Gordon, what are some of the programs going to look like? That recovery that Cornelius is talking about. What does that recovery look like? Is it a long process? Is it very layered? Just walk us through that.
Well, for one, it could be a long process, but it also depends upon how far in this is caught, and then remediation begins. So let's say that a teacher observes a child being very aggressive, being very self-depreciating even, having conflicts with almost everybody. And the parent and the teacher decides to bring this to the attention of the parents who are listed as the primary caregivers of this child. It might be, the child might be in the custody of one parent, but both are still listed as parents, and so they're the primary caregivers. So bringing that to the attention, it might be the first step of getting this remediated. Once that happens in school settings as well, you might have school psychologists who might be savvy to these kinds of nuances and be able to diagnose on some level that what's going on is parental alienation, and in the best interest of this child is to have this addressed. And family therapy might be one of those things that includes not just the custodial parents, but also the alienated parents, or the parents who is being alienated. So you have within that context this working through. We bear in mind that there are narcissistic features of the alienating parent. So that could make that more difficult as well in terms of their participation and their involvement in the care of this child. But again, this is where the care of the child, the interest of the child, ought always to remain central. And if that is what happens, I believe in the long run, a parent who is alienating within the context of the courts might be might be helped to or coerced into getting the kind of therapeutic help that is necessary. But here again is where individual work with the child needs to be done alongside the family work, because sometimes it's only in the individual sessions that the child has the freedom to be honest and to be transparent. And from that standpoint, the therapist might be, if they're separate therapists, they might collaborate, and so they in the family setting, these issues could be worked through. As I mentioned as well, bringing alongside these alienated and these children who have suffered, the victims, the true victims of alienation on some level, is to provide the kind of wraparound support. It's not asking for preferential treatment or prejudicial treatment of the child, but rather understanding of what is taking place and provide the support, the undergirding support that they'll need, so that they can stay in the therapeutic frame, do the work, and then manifest that outside of that. The other piece that is so crucial is that the alienated parent cannot give up on the child under no circumstance. You have to be in there, fighting, being open to receive this child, or being open to facilitate growth and development and reparative work of this child. So understand that even though the parent is alienated, it doesn't mean that they should stop trying to be the parent, the loving, supportive parent of this child. I've had situations where I would encourage the alienated parent to write letters and make copies of the dates that they were mailed or delivered, so that, and keep copies, so that at such time you have a record to show that you have been expressing interest in the well-being of this child over the years. We know that the alienating parent could intercept those letters, and the child never gets them. Even gifts that you make available on birthdays or your attempts to be in touch, they find some reason to go elsewhere. So those kinds of different stages in the process.
All right, Carrie, I want to come back to you now about at-risk behaviors. I want you to just expand on that for us and outline for us what are some of the at-risk behaviors that are usually associated with children who are alienated, particularly that age group, those teenage years that you come in contact with.
Just for me to go back to the whole concept of alienation and children dealing with alienation, you got to look at it truly in the context of the society that we're in today. And the reality is, and this is Kerry Jordan speaking, and not representing anybody else, but Kerry Jordan speaking, in the Barbadian context, we have to be true to ourselves. The observation is that the men are usually the victims of alienation, mostly men, and it is usually done at the behest of the court system, which is the number one weapon. I would dare call it the weapon used to do alienation. The argument usually is made that he is a lousy father, he doesn't take care of the child, and he doesn't do what he's supposed to do. And I think it's best I live with me. The child lives with me, and then I can let him see him on a weekend. I can let him see the child every 2 weeks. Sometimes the court would hear all the factors, and this is no indictment on the court system of Barbados either. The court hears all the facts that are presented as they are presented, and the decision is made usually in the interest of the mother, because the whole psychological understanding is that a child is best parented with the mother at a certain stage in its life. So the court thinks it's necessary that the child stay with the mother, and the father offers the necessary support, which is usually financial support, and also that the father spends some time with the child. These are then turned into weapons, not by the court, but the orders of the court then are turned into weapons to engage in alienation. And then you have the coupled with narcissistic personalities or narcissistic tendencies, the alienation itself is times 100. Sometimes the alienation is out of vindictive behavior of a parent because I don't like, so we, as Mr. Bartlett said, and rightly said, I myself was not confusing the two. I was speaking specifically to the population that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I don't have the issue of parental alienation as a result of narcissistic, but more so of vindictive behaviors of parents, because that's the population I deal with. So you know that the system deals with vindictive behaviors of one parent over next because you got another girlfriend and I didn't like that new girl and I want my child around that girl, so I can do as much as I possibly can to make sure that you don't even see the child, thinking that and it does have an impact on the father. It happens to the women too, but not on the scale that it would for the men. I also want to add to that all the things that we're discussing here, I'm glad that it's being discussed because in true reality, parental alienation and the recovery does not usually happen in the Barbadian context with treatment. That happens when the child gets older and decides to forgive, or the parent comes to some resolution at an older stage in their lives and say, well, you know, I was trying my best to connect with you, but your mother the what? Using the Barbadian vernacular, your mother behaving whatless. She just doing it she like. And to kind of, that's the Barbadian context. So we don't, I've heard Reverend Gordon speak about the age that you can start the treatment. And I know that if you're going to do proper treatment, that all the parties have to be willing. Because if the narcissist, and we discussed this last week, that the narcissistic parent, I don't know how that's going to work. Because when they go into the session, they might be willing to come to the session, but perpetuate their narcissistic behaviors in the session by blaming everybody else around them for why they did what they did and why the therapists themselves should join sides with them because this is the case. But in the Barbadian context and true context, the treatment aspect, especially treatment in Barbados for these kind of things, usually come at a cost. And most of these situations that happen with persons within an economic background that can't afford that cost of treatment. So as I know in the Barbados context, a lot of the times the parents end up, the alienated individual and the child who has been recipient of the negative situation involving alienation, that usually get fixed when there's at the adult stage in most instances, if the parties decide as adults thinking like adults to address the issue. It's very rare that there's intervention with alienation at the child stage in the Barbadian context. And that'll be just very real. The cost is exponential in terms of the cost for psychologists and treatment. And most of these parents, and then just basically a father will say to himself, and they're being real, most fathers say, she didn't want me around my child. All right. And for peace of mind, most men don't say, all right, until the child decide that they want to be with the father, and most fathers, in some instances, the father welcome the child back with open arms. But they're saying it for peace of mind of the male, they usually just say, okay, and stay away from the drama. Sometimes the drama still finds its way to them. But I just want to be clear that in the Barbadian context, we do not have the structure facility to support children of alienated, children that are victims of the alienation as a result of narcissistic parents. Just say it's very difficult to put a narcissistic parent into treatment because they will never see that something is wrong with them. And they themselves will have to come to have a, what you'll call it, come to Jesus moment to recognize that they have an issue. Then that may be when you can have leeway. I usually call it divine intervention has to happen to treat narcissistic personality disorders. It's not going to change just by you saying, like you would come and tell somebody, well, I did all this assessment on you, and it's clear to me that you may have depression. So let's start with how we can fix this. The person with depression diagnosis, you'll want to fix the depression. The traits of a narcissistic person would never allow them to accept that they need to be treated. So I just want to put that out there first in terms of the treatment. In terms of alienating alienated parenting in Barbados context. And then to answer your question about the recovery and the programs available, I really don't know how to answer it because, as I said, in the Barbadian context, the cost to treatment, although we have the facility by the state that provides treatment for those things, it is very difficult to get all parties involved, especially with the negative connotation that is associated with the facility. I am not going to the facility in Black Rock to get no treatment or to be told that I got a problem with me because anybody see me driving a narcissistic parent or a person with narcissistic tendencies will never let anybody see them making a left turn off Black Rock Main Road into the government facility to get assistance. So even if the state may be willing to take on the cost to deal with that, but it's because the child might be a patient or client. Sorry, let me use the word client of the facility as a result of the damage that has been done. But the narcissistic tendency individual is not going to make that left turn or right turn, depending on what direction you're coming from, to go into that facility because it is going to be a smudge on their personality as a result of their narcissism. So I can't answer particularly to programs for recovery, but I can say that now that the topic is being discussed and it is real, and we recognize that it's real, these are things that I think Mr. Bartlett kept mentioning that social workers, law enforcement, teachers, and everybody need to make themselves au fait to recognize alienation, recognize narcissism, narcissistic tendencies, must I correct myself, and activate the powers that need to be activated, and with divine intervention for the narcissistic parent tendencies, they themselves will actively participate in the recovery.
All right, I want to go to you, Cornelius, because Carrie made a very interesting point that it's primarily men who find themselves the alienated parent. And that's for several reasons. We had this conversation earlier in the week, and it was noted that most of the time mothers tend to be the parents. But it also struck back to something that we had said too, that sometimes these men get a double dose because they themselves too probably had a mother that alienated them from their father as well. And then they come to have a female that alienates them from their children. So in situations like that, Cornelius, what ripple effect do you believe that can have?
Well, what was interesting about life, right, is that we see so many generational transferences right across a variety of human behaviors. And as Kerry was there talking, I felt so proud. I was actually like getting called up because Kerry was hitting every nail on the head. And I love when he actually included the judiciary and he said, well, it's not an indictment on them, but I will make a blanket statement now. It is not good enough that we as a society continue in ignorance. It is not good enough that we as a society continue in ignorance. I am going to reiterate that the hope that we are looking for, there's no pill that a narcissistic parent who is creating in the alienation environment in her child's environment to alienate their father or vice versa, that there's no pill for that. So to be honest, right, the hope for these children is involved in, I mentioned earlier, the attitude of the alienated parent, being very forgiving and being loving to the extent that if it takes a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you will receive your child back with open arms. So that's one. But let's look at the wider peripheral. The police need to be more understanding, law enforcement, because when you see a situation arises and you're called into a home where a man may be coming to see his child and a narcissistic parent, whether it's the male or female, is claiming this person is coming on their property to cause some sort of disturbance. If you're law enforcement and you're trained, your eyes and your brain is peeled to what to look for, when you arrive, you realize that, something, this woman or this man just really want to come and see their child. But this person wants to practice alienation and is trying to create a lot of false drama and false scenarios around the parent. So let's go past law enforcement. Let's look at the court. The court needs And I'm looking forward, and I'm going to say it now, I'm announcing it now. I'm looking forward to having conferences and seminars in Barbados where we invite the commissioner and his team. We invite the Chief Justice and their team. We invite the Bar Association. We invite the guidance counselors. We invite all these people to be exposed to seminars, because I know of a case where actually a man called me a couple of weeks ago. Because since we started this, I mean, you'd be amazed to know the amount of interest that it took on. And people that are, it's all professionals that you wouldn't believe they're going through this. They look normal when they come. You see them at meetings and on the road laughing and talking, and you would not believe the amount of strain and the amount of pain they're going through with not being able to see their children because of rejection and parental alienation. One guy said to me a couple of weeks ago, he said, you know, my child, I was alienated from my child for the last 7 years. For the last 7 years, from my time my child was 3. My child just did 11 plus, and I cannot tell my child congratulations on 11 plus results. That hurt me, because every time I hear these things, right, it hits me deep, because I empathize. I am by nature a family advocate. I love to see families working well. That's part of the reason, I guess, why I do this. And to hear these sad stories, and this person is a professional that has the means to do well by their child. This is a person that is paying whatever maintenance, probably more than is required. But this man simply wants to have a relationship with his child. And this man is now on the other end of an ex-wife who has gone through, I mean, the story is so dark and dirty, who has gone through extreme means to make sure that he feels the pain of the marriage that was ended through using the child as a pawn. So he went to court, and this is an example, trying to get the child on vacation, to part of the vacation. And listen to what a presiding officer in court was alleged to have said, because I wasn't there. This is what he's telling me. What is the big deal about this vacation? There are many more to come. Denied. But the next vacation, the child was alienating the father. Now, if you had a presiding officer in court who understood the dynamics of parental alienation, those kind of decisions would be better made. In other words, the decisions that are being made now lacks the knowledge and the understanding of this topic, lacks the knowledge and the understanding of how parental alienation works. Even when you mention the word parental alienation, if I went right across the board and asked all the presiding officers in court and all the lawyers and all that, do you know, have you ever heard of parental alienation? I hazard to say they will say no. But if you explain what parental alienation is, say, oh, that was happening for years. But I don't think that the systems that we have in place that could do better to protect these children are knowledgeable enough to do the protection. So I really am praying for a day when our ignorance will end, when we start to have all institutions that are involved in making decisions and managing the family, members of the family, namely, especially our children, will come up to scratch. So in terms of hope, sorry, but there's no pill that you're going to take and the child is going to snap out of it because the child is brainwashed. There's no pill that you're going to take that the narcissistic parent is going to snap out of it, because narcissism, by its very nature, that person will never get help and will mostly die like that. There's no pill that is going to solve the pain of the father. What the hope is to look like is a variety of institutions, the extended family, priests, teachers, guidance counselors, law enforcement, judiciary. It is going to require a microcosm of people, or a wide cadre of people within our society, within our societal fabric, to get knowledgeable on this topic and start to do whatever little you can do to add to the holistic picture of hope for these children, and by extension, the parents who are suffering it. We know, and I mean, we talk about drug rehab. We know that, for example, that a lot of the children who suffer parental alienation end up in places like Vernon House and different rehab centers, because we somehow seem to look at the things that happen and call it a problem. And I would say this, a lot of the vices, whether it's drug use, violence that we have in society, they're not problems, they're symptoms. And if we trace these symptoms back to root, I can guarantee you that not all the time, but a lot of the time you're going to trace it back to parental alienation. And I pause there.
Dr. Gordon, you've heard the situation in Barbados from
I
Kerry,
think,
who has
I think Kerry had his hand up, but
oh, Carrie. Oh, I'm going to come to you, Carrie. But Dr. Gordon, you've heard the situation. How does it compare in the United States? Is this a topic or an issue that has gotten the attention you believe there, and maybe can give us a kind of guide to how we can deal with it here in Barbados, as it is now in its formative, very, very embryonic stages of being recognized?
It's not as widespread as it should be in terms of awareness. However, as therapists become more aware and the therapists interface with the courts, then this become a part of the process. When it's mandated by the courts that they go into therapy, the therapist has some leverage in terms of what gets reported. And if the alienating parent is still resistant or is in the way, then that gets reported as well. But you see, sometimes what comes into play with the therapist, though, is that the therapist has to look for the weak points of the person suffering from narcissistic tendencies, and actually enter through those places so that the narcissistic person could actually be a little more open because they see benefit coming to them and not just simply going to the child or going to someone else. But it's becoming more a part of the process. Especially when children starts to act, what some will say act up or act out dynamics. They might be labeled in that way, but they begin to look as the trail is traced back and see where this leads. And so that's where the help comes into.
Well, thanks for waiting, Kerry. Go ahead. You have your hands up. Go ahead. You took it down, Kerry? I thought you had a question or comment.
sorry about that. I was speaking, but I didn't realize I was muted. I was responding to Mr. Bartlett's comments in respect of police and the expectation of knowing about the topic to better address the situation, respond to certain calls, and also the judiciary. As I said earlier, the judiciary makes the decisions based on the facts as presented to them, and not necessarily. And I said the facts as presented to them, not necessarily that the facts may be the true facts. And then the police themselves can only take action based on what is written in the order. So the police themselves may have in their mind, this is the case, this is an issue, but they can only take action based on the court order. So if the court order is saying certain things has to happen or certain things are being done a certain way, the police cannot go past the authority outside of the order in itself. And I'm aware of some of the things you spoke about where you have the instance of the call coming in that the parent is aggressive and they need the assistance there because the mother is saying the father is out there aggressive and stuff. But some of these parents do know how to wind up a man. And by the time he gets there to collect the child, the whole plan was, I can get him started so that when the police come, they will see him in that mode. And there's not much you can say to a man when he's trying to defend himself or his children. So most of the time when you get there, in those instances, the man is sometimes very aggressive. And it is not because he's aggressive towards you. Sometimes he's at his wits' end with the situation, especially with just a simple order of the court, where it says he's supposed to have the child at 9 o'clock on the weekend. When he gets there, the mother doesn't have the child ready, saying the child just got up, the child got to bed, he got to wait. And then the purposely make the man wait for 2 to 3 hours, and still the child is not ready. And now the man starts up, and by that time the police arrive, the man is already warmed up. So that's where you get the aggressive nature. But as I said, the police can only act and take the action based on what the order of the court is and not necessarily on their feelings at that point in time. Because I speaking from personal experience, your feelings sometimes does not matter in the execution of the law. It does not.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah,
that's the point I was going to make.
but that's a
And
good point to
I
make.
appreciate.
Yeah,
Yeah, if I may, I know
go
I
ahead, Ferdinand.
appreciate the point that Kerry is making, and I mean, you can see that Kerry has a whole lot of practical experience because he doesn't speak like someone who read a book. You can see that he's very realistic what he's saying. But the single thing I would just want to say though is, and I agree with him that if you're a police officer, you're carrying out instructions and you'll be given specifics sometimes, but sometimes it's not what, but it's how it's done. And I believe that a lot more empathy. The court does not legislate empathy. Empathy is something that comes from you as a human being, one towards another. And I watched some police officers carry out the duties that I'm very impressed with. I remember seeing a police officer already at the stadium talk to a child, for example, a female police officer. And I stood there with admiration for the police officer. She was talking to that child like if it was her own child, blood child. You could see the empathy and the love and the care. It wasn't like law says so and so, so look, come here and trying to be high-handed and strong-armed with that child. So what I'm talking about is most of the members of the police service are male. And when you go to a residence, I'm just saying that I would like to see a little empathy where it could be given, for example, to men who are at wit's end, as Kerry puts it. I would want to see the court, for example, rather than take the so-called facts, to be wise enough to order a report, for example, get the best person, for example, in psychotherapy and best person in social work or whatever, to go and do an investigation and come back. Because there are ways of discovering these things, as good as a narcissist may think that they are. When you see the research that I've seen, I mean, like I was amazed at the quality of research done overseas. So, for example, you have a gentleman by the name of Dr. Childress, and people can go and search him, right? He did a research where he says, whenever you see a child or hear a child say, I want nothing to do with my father, I want nothing to do with my mother, the average untrained mind is going to say, well, if he don't want to go with the mother or father, they must be doing him something bad, right? That's logical, right? Logic does not play out as often as we think when it comes to psychological things. But you know what he says? He says, whenever you hear a child, he says children who are abused sexually or physically never ever wants nothing to do with that parent who abuses them. But when you hear a child says, I want nothing to do with daddy, I want nothing to do with mommy, he said the alarm bell should go off in your head to investigate, not to assume, but to investigate for parental alienation. And if you look, there's another psychologist who done a lot of work on the actual the test to do for parental alienation. And that test is done on the parent in the home who you suspect of alienating, the child who is alienating, and the parent who is being alienated. You do a triangulation on all three of those, you can conclusively, almost close to 100% guarantee of diagnosing when parental alienation is happening. So I'm just saying that the court needs to get to the place where we start to have people in Barbados trained up and start to use them to bring evidence to the court. Coming with so-called layman facts to the court will very often allow the alienator to get away and to allow the child to continue in abuse. And I want to highlight that and put that on a beacon, to allow the parent to get away with abusing their child. The abuse is what is the problem of that child, is the real problem we should be looking for or looking at. So I would close there on that.
All right, thanks so much. Our time is against us, and we pretty much run out of time. Kerry, before you run off, I just want to get some final words from you, and then from Dr. Gordon, and then we can wrap up. So, Kerry, we're wrapping up now. I just want some final words that you would want to leave our audience with.
Respectfully, final words from me would very much sum up that this particular session is important to recognize that narcissistic tendency parenting is out there and is real. Also, the alienation of parents is the alienation of children from one parent to another is real. And it is sometimes not just associated with vindictive behavior, but it is a result of the child being a child of a narcissistic tendency type parent. And that we need to do a lot more, as Mr. Bartlett says, in recognizing that the issue is real. And I will go and sum up by my one statement again, reach one, teach one, and that's not only for children, but reach one, parent, teach one. And if you can reach one and teach one, then we're good to go and starting the ball rolling and recognizing that this is real and that practitioners every day deal with the effects of narcissistic tendency type parents. So that's my last word.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I know you have to go off. You have a 7 o'clock appointment. Thanks for taking the time for staying with us and sharing your knowledge and observations and expertise. It has really led to a very educational conversation this afternoon. So go off and go safely, and we look forward to having you for another conversation sometime very soon. All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Dr. Gordon, final words from you before we wrap up.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Parental alienation is a real experience. Now, parents with narcissistic tendencies do alienate. Some are intentional and some are just about self. And the alienation is the result of self-indulgence. There is no time frame in which this can be remedied. It's just to be open, and it should remain open-ended in terms of treatment, in terms of the recovery work. To set conditions, I believe there ought to be an openness to this happening, both from the alienated parent and hopefully the child, and the alienating parent as well. There ought to be an openness, but at least from the standpoint of the alienated parent, there need to be hopefulness, there need to be some degree of humility, but above all else, seeking to understand the process and being available, making oneself available to the process. I believe that society as a whole can come together to make this happen. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Gordon R. Edwards, for being part of our conversation as we were talking about children and recovery from parental alienation, hope for children in recovering and reconnecting with alienated parents. Cornelius, I give you 30 seconds. Your final thoughts as we wrap up.
Yes, I really would want everyone who is listening to this discussion to share it with as many people as you can, and recognize that our future is in the hands of our children. And the more problems or the more issues that we can resolve at root with our children, the better it will augur well for our future. So I would want us to have that as a beacon, and that the seeds we plant now will bear fruit later on. If they're bad seeds, guess what? You'll have bad fruit. If they're good seeds, you'll have good fruit. So I thank you, Dale. Thank you, listeners. Thank you to my fellow panelists, and God bless.
And of course, you can stay connected to these informative discussions, as Cornelia says, and insights by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Family Fest Barbados. Simply click the subscribe button and notification bell to stay updated and informed. Our social media handle is Family Fest Barbados, and our website is familyfestbarbados.org. Help us spread the message of help, hope, healing, and happiness. So thank you so much again to our panelists, Carrie Jordan, Reverend Dr. Gordon A. Edwards, and Cornelius Bartlett. We're wishing you a safe and healthy and happy and productive week ahead, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thank you.
We're Family Fest, giving our best, empowering families to be the pillars of society. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness. With God on our side, we're marching strong, looking out for hurting children all around, and helping the parents carry on, standing united unity. Family Fest, bringing healing and rest to hurting families, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness, bringing help, hope, healing, happiness.